To the former King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, it seemed like few things could be more romantic than an unsanctioned honeymoon to Nazi Germany. After announcing that he had found it impossible
to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love.
Edward VIII officially abdicated the British throne on the 11th of December 1936, less than a year after he'd originally ascended it. Having met the twice-married American socialite at a party thrown by his then-mistress in 1931, Edward spent the next 5 years trying to secretly balance the controversial courtship with his royal duties. That was until 1936, when Edward admitted to Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin that he planned on marrying Wallis, and if he had to, he was prepared to give up the crown. Edward and Wallis were married on the 3rd of June 1937, and although the newlyweds officially honeymooned in Austria, they touched down in Berlin for a 12-day tour of Nazi Germany just 4 months after their wedding. The recently styled Duke and Duchess of Windsor had been officially invited to the country by the Nazi Party's German Labour Front, which in 1933 had replaced all independent trade unions in the country. Although Edward promised that the visit would be without any political considerations and merely as an independent observer studying industrial and housing conditions, the new king, George VI, was outraged at his brother's sudden involvement in European politics, especially since when he abdicated, Edward assured his family that he planned on avoiding public appearances. Even so, upon their arrival in Berlin that autumn of 1937, as 2,000 Germans lined the streets, Edward and Wallis were treated like royalty. Even the German Labour Front's head, Robert Ley, greeted the Duchess by kissing her hand and calling her Your Highness. It was an all-out charm offensive, and the Windsors were very receptive. During their first night in the country, Edward and Wallis dined with top Nazi officials like Goebbels, von Ribbentrop and Speer, with Goebbels writing in his diary after the dinner that the Duke is wonderful, a nice, sympathetic fellow who is open and clear and with a healthy understanding of people. It's a shame he is no longer king. With him, we would have entered into an alliance. Since the German government had funded the entire trip, the Nazis were able to decide exactly what the couple could and couldn't see. Over the next 12 days, using Hitler's personal train to get around, the Windsors visited factories, toured industrial areas, and inspected SS troops. Then, on the 22nd of October, Edward and Wallis dined with the Führer himself. Although little is known about what was actually discussed at Hitler's mountainside retreat, the Duke of Windsor wrote a personalised letter to the Führer, thanking him for his hospitality. Edward wrote in German, "Our trip through Germany has made a great impression on us. Many thanks to you for the wonderful time that we had with you at the Obersalzberg." Just months after the Windsors started to lease a mansion in Paris, the US-based NBC commissioned the Duke to give his first radio broadcast since his abdication. While touring the First World War battlefields in Verdun, Edward's voice could be heard via radios across the world, except for in Britain, where the BBC refused to broadcast the apparent plea for peace. The Duke said, "I am deeply conscious of the presence of the great company of the dead, and I am convinced that could they make their voices heard, they would be with me in what I am about to say. I speak simply as a soldier of the last war, whose most earnest prayer it is that such cruel and destructive madness shall never again overtake mankind. There is no land whose people want war." Of course, whether Edward was genuinely for peace is contentious, given he did show explicit admiration for a highly militarized Nazi Germany. Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, and 2 days later, the UK and France declared war on Berlin. After a brief trip to the UK where Edward was made a major general attached to the British military mission in France, the Windsors had to flee south to the French Basque Country when France was invaded in 1940. The Windsors were then driven towards the Spanish border, where they were eventually issued transit visas to enter Franco's Spain and then Salazar's Portugal. It was after the couple was set up in the mansion of the Portuguese banker Ricardo Espirito Santo Silva that Germany's covert plot to abduct the Duke of Windsor was devised. In June, the German ambassador to Madrid telegraphed Ribbentrop to ask how to deal with Edward and Wallis in Lisbon, and whether they should consider the possibility of detaining them. At the same time, the British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wrote 2 hurried telegrams to the Windsors. The first demanded that the couple return to British soil, and that the Duke could be court-martialed if he refused. The second appointed Edward as governor of the Bahamas, alongside the order that he should assume the post immediately. Churchill himself later told the US President Dwight Eisenhower that the Duke's appointment to the governorship was part of strenuous efforts to get him away from Europe beyond the reach of the enemy. Despite the telegraphs, Ribbentrop received word that the Duke intends to postpone his departure as long as possible, in the hope of a turn of events favourable to him. In fact, documents recovered from Germany in 1945 revealed that when the Windsors were told that they may have an opportunity in the future to reascend the British throne, they both seemed to be completely bound up in the formalistic ways of thought, since they replied that according to the British Constitution, this was not possible after abdication. When an agent then remarked the course of war may produce changes even in the British Constitution, the Duchess in particular became very thoughtful. Ribbentrop then directed Madrid's German embassy to try and entice the Windsors back to Spain. Having directly enabled Franco's nationalist victory in the Spanish Civil War just a few years earlier, the Nazi plan to seize Edward in Spain seemed much more feasible than it would have been under Salazar's pro-British administration. It was arranged that the Duke of Windsor would be invited to the Spanish border for a hunting trip, and an opportunity to discuss diplomatic ties between London and Madrid. There, Edward would be told that the British Secret Service planned on having him removed, and that if he agreed to stay in Spain, he would be offered a lifestyle fit for a king. Apparently, 50 million Swiss francs had been set aside to finance the Duke, but Edward couldn't agree to the plan. With the Windsors still preparing to soon leave for the Bahamas, Hitler himself reportedly assigned Walter Schellenberg to take over Operation Willy. According to Australia's The Sun Herald, the Germans had hit on the fantastic idea of keeping the Duke around, and if it seemed politically advantageous to them, of trying to return him to the throne of Britain as the Peace King once the country was occupied. The German minister in Lisbon called on the Duke and told him of the German desire that the Duke should remain inside the German circle of communications. The Duke replied to the effect that his one aim was to be out of service to his country. He wanted only to service that country as best he could. Still, to consolidate rumours of a plot by the British to have Edward liquidated, Schellenberg supposedly arranged to have stones thrown against the walls of the Windsors' residence. He also had a bouquet of flowers sent to Wallis, along with a warning that the couple would certainly die if they went to the Bahamas. When the British politician Sir Walter Monckton arrived in Lisbon to speed up the Windsors' departure, Hitler himself apparently urged German soldiers to abduct the pair outright. In the end, all Schellenberg really achieved was to delay the arrival of the 85 pieces of baggage that the pair had planned to travel with. When the Duke and Duchess of Windsor sailed from Lisbon on the 1st of August 1940 aboard the American Export Line's steamship Excalibur, it became clear that Germany couldn't have its English puppet king after all.